Great. All right, everybody, welcome to the House Government Operations and Military Affairs Committee on this Friday, January 20th. We're here this morning. We're going to be talking about a number of items, a little bit of review of things we've heard that we've been asked to give feedback on in a memo that I plan to draft over the weekend and hopefully bring a draft to you early next week to get over to appropriations. They are working on the Budget Adjustment Act and slated for a vote out of their committee next week. So the train is leaving the station. The first item that we're going to talk about, I've asked Chris Roop from the Joint Fiscal Office to just give us a little bit of context for the true-up language around pensions. So I don't think this will be too complicated, but I wanted to just make sure we had an opportunity, since pensions is part of our jurisdiction, to have a line in the memo about that. And so with that, Chris, please take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Chris Roop, Joint Fiscal Office. As you noted, this committee was asked by the House Appropriations Committee to review a section of the proposed BAA language that pertains to the teacher retirement system, making an $800,000 appropriation adjustment to the FY23 budget for that item. I just want to give you a little bit of context and explanation behind what this is, because sometimes when you see something like that, you're like, what is this? What's going on here? Last year, as you know, the legislature passed a pretty significant pension reform bill, Act 114, that lowered employer pension costs that year. The budget that was originally passed in FY23 reflected a preliminary estimate of the savings that would result from those changes in FY23. Subsequent to Act 114 passing and the budget passing, the actuaries reran their numbers at a revised point in time with the membership in place at the time, and all of the wording as it was passed in Act 114 was plugged into their black box model. And they recalculated the ADAC, the actuarially determined employer contribution for the year, at a rate that was $800,000 more than we had planned in the budget. So this technical correction essentially increases the appropriation by $800,000 just to make sure that the state is budgeting the number that the actuaries required of us. $800,000 may sound like a lot of money, and it is. It's $500,000 for the ed fund, $300,000 for the general fund. But for some helpful context, this is an almost $200 million line item. So this is a pretty small rounding error. From some additional context, had the legislature not passed Act 114, the ADAC would have been about $205.2 million for this year. So now, including this adjustment, it would be just shy of $195 million. This adjustment has been expected by the Joint Fiscal Office and the Treasurer. The $500,000 increase to the Ed Fund that's proposed has been worked into the Ed Fund outlooks that our office produces. So in my view, I do not view this to be a surprise or controversial matter, but I wanted to make sure you all had a chance to understand what this was, what was going on here, and had an opportunity to ask any questions.
Thank you very much, Chris. Does anybody have any questions about the true-up language? It's good to hear that the amount that we need to budget for the ADEC has been lowered by the work that we did last biennium. I want to underscore that as many times as I possibly can. Great. Well, that is a good segue, Chris. If you have other places to be, if they're absent any other questions from the committee, I really appreciate you coming in to give us a little testimony so we could include that in our committee discussion this morning.
My pleasure.
All right. So my plan for today was to go through a few of the things we've already heard about and have a more open committee discussion that will inform what the committee is comfortable with me including in the memo over to appropriations. We've heard from a number of folks over the last couple of weeks. So if people need a little bit of a refresher or you want me to kind of put something in a parking lot, my hope today is that I can kind of tick off things that are where we can find some consensus. And then next week, if there are other open items that we need to take a little bit more testimony on, do that early in the week so that we can weigh in, and there may be things that we just decide we're going to leave to our appropriations colleagues to make up their own minds about. Yes, Representative Hanko.
So what document should we be referring to and where would we find it?
We are not reviewing a document right now. What we are doing is having a committee discussion about the many things that we have heard related to the Budget Adjustment Act. You have all received a memo that has all kinds of different language and all kinds of different things on it that, but it's not a bill, right? There are pieces of, so if you want to go on the appropriations website and take a look at the Budget Adjustment Act language that they are looking at, that might help inform this. But I think what I would like us to do right now is to talk about more high level, not about specific language, because we're not holding the Budget Adjustment Act here, about our policy preferences related to what they're discussing over there in the context of what we've heard here. So I want to first get the propose essentially items and then have a little bit of discussion about that unless there's objection from the committee on that.
So you'll be answering the memo over the weekend. That's what your plan is to do based on our input.
And I'm also I'm being somewhat, more democratic than chairs sometimes are about saying if we need to hear extra testimony in order for our committee to feel comfortable weighing in on something, trying to make space for that. Also understanding that their Budget Adjustment Act is going and we are going to hear the governor's budget address this afternoon. So we'll be thinking about the next fiscal year pretty quickly here. So the first area that's on my list of things that we've taken testimony on were a couple of items related to the Cannabis Control Board. So that should be pretty fresh in our minds since yesterday we took some testimony there. So the first piece, we all took a look at this concept that the vape products were being caught up in the tax regime that's related to tobacco, e-cigarettes, and that clarifying language is being worked on by Ways and Means. But my intention in the memo, my proposal to you all is to say that we are going to defer to Ways and Means, but support the idea that there is a separate tax regime for tobacco and cannabis products, and that any interpretation clarifying language that just clarifies the legislative intent that vaped products that contain cannabis are taxed under the cannabis regime, and that the vape products for e-cigarettes, tobacco products, are taxed under that regime. Does anybody have any concern about me including that recommendation in the memo? So that's
Totally makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Any questions about that for me? All right, so I will include that in my draft. The second piece related to the Cannabis Control Board, a little bit further back, but the Representative Hooper's able to get in here. We're having a little issue. If you're folks back home, if you're wondering why I'm distracted, our handle of our door in this beautiful but ancient room it seems to stick sometimes. So the second item that I was looking for feedback on with under the Cannabis Control Board is that the auditor had asked us, and Chair Pepper seemed to concur with them, that the timeliness of the reporting requirement for the auditor to have to take a deep dive into what the structure of the Cannabis Control Board could be. Would anybody have any objection to me working, or at least including in our memo, blessing the idea of just pushing that reporting requirement out for at least one more year? Okay. Seems like Representative Nugent.
Yeah, just a question, I guess. My understanding is that report is due in November of 2024. But as far as I understand the legislation.
So I think that the challenge is that they would, in this coming fiscal year, starting in July, starting now, basically have to gear up for that report. So they were looking for, because it's going to affect their coming fiscal year, they were looking for an early sign from all of us about whether the auditor needed to include that in the budget that they're currently creating. So because of the way the fiscal years work, they wanted us to move that forward. I think if we signal that we're willing to be flexible about that, whether it gets included in the BAA or not, it'll bring down the urgency of the auditor needing to make a budgetary staffing decision around this report for the coming fiscal year. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and is it okay if I follow up with just some thoughts?
Please, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like a good thing to have more information early on. That's my thinking anyway, to like be able to evaluate how things are going, catch stuff before it gets bigger. So I guess, and me being new to this whole thing, I could be getting this wrong, but it seems like it would be beneficial to have some kind of evaluation plan in place. So just hoping that that doesn't get lost, or would love to see some plan for that to happen in some way.
Yeah, please.
So to what you're saying, I totally agree with you. So kind of like the request and reason I'm supportive of pushing this out about a year is they started late by about a year. And that was a result. We passed this legislation pre-COVID. The COVID just manicness delayed the implementation of all of this. So in my mind, putting this out about a year or so gives them the actual functional runway to do sales and data collection. And for us to be able to look at it more than hey, we've been up and running for 90 days. Let's evaluate us. Kind of a thought process.
I also think that from the testimony we heard, the auditor was saying that the specific report requirement was for them to make a comparison between the structure, not necessarily the sales but should the structure of the Cannabis Control Board and the way it fits in all of state government, do we have it right, and should it be a completely different model? And I think some of the questions that you might be most interested in, if I'm understanding your Representative Nugent, wouldn't really be addressed by that. But it would require, according to the testimony we heard, a lot of sort of digging into a very small, to compare a very limited runway of the Cannabis Control Board's work to other similar regulatory structures. We just didn't have enough to work with yet, I've been trying to boil down the testimony from the auditor and Chair Pepper. But I think the questions you're asking are ones that are more like our purview, and we might want to work with Joint Fiscal and others to get more information about how is this marketplace really going, and what are some of the consequences of what we've done. Am I understanding you right?
Yeah, and I guess my other concern is just that if it's not required in the legislation in anywhere, is there going to be evaluation that's happening or not? Is that just going to be wouldn't it be nice, but it won't happen?
So specifically from the auditor, no, but from us, I think you're going to see the legislature, both bodies, looking at the Cannabis Control Board under a giant magnifying glass every year for a long time.
I can promise you that's coming. Yes. Yeah. Don't worry about that part. Yes.
You're in the right place. Representative Hooper.
Well, I think that's the major point that we should be examining, because when something is in such flux, the validity of the information that would be in the report, we will then base our decisions on going forward, could be seriously skewed. Letting the system basically settle down into running the way it should be running before, they're still implementing stuff.
Yeah.
And will be for the next.
Is there a way to I'm just thinking when you hire a new employee, to do a job, you don't usually want to let them just keep going without any check-ins early on. But it sounds like we'll be doing that in a capacity is my main.
Yeah, I think, I think it's about what kind of information are we looking for, and whose responsibility is it to gather it, report it, collect it, and get back to us. And I think that we're going to see a lot of information about sort of revenue. And I think that some of the things that I'm interested in from the public safety side around cannabis are things that we will need more time with retail markets open to see. I think, I can't remember who asked the question, but there was a question about, have we seen some of the, increase in, folks, crime related to, oh, you asked that Representative Chase. We don't know that yet, right? We have only just seen retail open for a few months now. And so that's early days. So are there public safety questions that we want to ask? And we're going to start to get some of that data, but probably not in time for a report that would have to be done in this coming fiscal year. Representative?
Yeah, if I can too, my position on Elcar, we took testimony on, and of course they did too, their rulemaking process, the Cannabis Control Board did. We had folks that came in and testified with concerns for labeling. Again, I mentioned that as far as, what California has done after their 10 years of cannabis tax and regulate. So there's supposed to be a letter to committees of jurisdiction, and we're that, to look at that as well as some other things. So, that's going to open up a conversation here as well for those sorts of things.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to weigh in on Cannabis Control Board related items? These are really the two things. So the aligning of the tax regime and then the potential for a 1-year push on the auditor's report on the structure. Okay, so yes, Representative.
I just want to throw out that initially when we did this, we were very cautious to the idea of large corporations coming in and sort of dominating the market. And it seems like immediately there were a couple of sales in the medical end of it and some of the production stuff. I think we should keep our eye on that going forward. I don't want necessarily Kellogg's taking over the market. Not they grow wheat.
Yeah, so is that, would you like to see perhaps Bryn come in and talk a little bit about, give us a report on the types of licensees, who's holding those licenses, and what the experience has been of how the marketplace is shaping up? Because they gave us a little overview yesterday, but.
They were talking about that the other day. It sort of dawned on me that different divisions of a corporation might acquire licenses and they would be separate entities. And it seemed like the discussion was they would be valid under the law. But under the large corporate umbrella, it might be the same thing as Unilever taking over Ben & Jerry's. So.
Yeah, so we'll definitely have the Cannabis Control Board folks back in to talk about the licensees and who owns the people who own the licenses. I think that's an important question to make sure that the intent for us to support smaller businesses, Vermont-based businesses, to have more of a craft industry than a big, I can't remember what, I think Bryn had said something about like the McDonald's of pot. We don't want that. Yeah. So the next couple of things related to testimony we heard very recently. So the Agency of Digital Services gave us a presentation. I'll recall the big spreadsheet that we looked at from yesterday's testimony. The one part I thought we could kind of tick off my list easily is, because they have a number of items that were appropriated previously, but they are moving from their base to one time. That's not new policy. I'm agnostic as to how that's accounted for. I don't think that's in our committee's wheelhouse. I think I might just say a line to say, if you agree with their assertion that this is just a lateral move into another column and they're treating it differently for the way that they're doing multi-year project accounting, this committee doesn't have any issue with that. But that's more of an appropriations budget committee accounting thing than it is about new policy or new program. And Representative Chase, do you have any comment on that?
What they're proposing seems to align with best practices for IT projects. So from the accounting side. So there's a concern about it.
it seemed fine with me. So we're okay saying, as long as appropriations understands that that's what they're doing and shares our understanding of it, we're okay with the projects being moved into that. The one piece that they were proposing that is time sensitive new money was the roughly $1.7 million for the LiDAR for the matching funds for the grant. My inclination is to have this committee say that we support that money given the timeliness. If the appropriations committee also finds that that is appropriate enough based on their rules about BAA versus budget. But I think given the fact that there's federal money on the table and that there's a seasonality issue, that's worth squeezing into the BAA for my money. But wanted to open it up for further committee discussion if there's anybody who disagrees with that or wants us to qualify the comments that get into the memo.
No.
That sounds good.
No, I think it's a completely worthwhile project. It's got a lot of function for state, municipalities, private business. Everybody will benefit from that.
Is anybody confused about what LiDAR is or? It's pretty amazing that you can shoot a bunch of lasers essentially at the ground and the computers can translate all that into very accurate information and imagery. It's kind of pretty incredible technology, but.
I saw it applied to an architectural project for our opera house to create 3D internal imaging that can do like full 360 rotation.
Why? You're never going to have to go anywhere.
It's like, it was insane when they put together this presentation. Yeah.
Great. So those pieces were easy. So then the last part we heard yesterday that that I think we should take a few minutes to think about and open up and see if we want to take any further testimony on had to do with the proposal regarding judiciary IT improvements and the move for them to do their own network system. So so we heard yesterday, and if you do want to go back to yesterday's testimony and the documents there, a number of different requests for BAA from the judiciary. I am lumping them in my mind into sort of two categories. One is a number of smaller ticket items that seem really important for the ability to do things like have good remote participation from a facility. Those seem like no-brainers to me. They also are super time sensitive. Mm-hmm. My inclination is for our committee to support most of those items. Mm-hmm. The bigger question about should the IT network, the whole network move over and in the BAA and go from being an ADS provided and managed system and to deal with some of the bandwidth challenges and other network traffic challenges that have been related to the systems. That to me is a question where I think I use the word that we're ill-equipped at this point, or maybe we just don't have enough information, but I feel a little uncomfortable weighing in. And so I look to Representative Chase and others to see if I'm reading the room right.
I did find out some additional information about that. And it sounds like there are some bandwidth constraints that need to be addressed. I think the bigger policy of having the separate branch of government being able to have its own separate network is a solid position. I don't know what the time frame is for this. Like if going into BAA means that they can provide better service to Vermonters sooner than waiting to go through the regular budget. So I don't know about that, but it does appear to be an issue that is currently reducing the quality of service to Vermonters and needs to be addressed. So I would support letting them do that as soon as they can. To the bigger policy of whether it goes into BAA or not, that is not something I really have a solid opinion or a solid understanding of, like, what are the rules for BAA?
Yeah, so generally, new policy doesn't go in the budget adjustment. That's the general overarching framework. However, we make decisions in a very nuanced and gray area when it comes to, there's money already allocated for something, who's gonna get to spend it, right? Like, there's gonna be IT money for the judiciary. The question is it in the judiciary side or is it in the ADS side?
Yeah.
And am I hearing you say, Representative Chase, that given the testimony we heard and the further conversations and digging into it, that you're agnostic about whether it needs to be in BAA or versus the FY24 budget, but that you are supportive of the position that judiciary be able to move forward with their plan as it was presented to us?
Yeah, I think that's a fair summary. And it, you know, it's more along the lines of if I was designing a network from the ground up, how would I do it? That's different from, you know, judiciary coming in and saying, hey, this is our house, we'd like to own the wires in it. So it may be possible that leaving it under ADS would be more efficient, but I think what they've proposed is a solid plan.
So I think that this particular item, I'd like to put in the parking lot over the weekend.
Yeah.
And have this be one of the last things that I sort of finalize in the memo drafting, because like I had said yesterday, the thing that we're weighing is Vermonters are not getting the justice that they need fast enough, right? We have an inefficiency in the judiciary. We saw it in the courthouses. You talk to anybody who from, you know, whether it's, you know, they're involved in a criminal case or they've gone through a divorce in the last couple of years, you know, the ability to get the courts running more efficiently, it has a real time component. And so that's one of the things that makes me want to say, let's just do whatever we need to do to get done, because a couple $1 million is worth it, especially if the, you know, judiciary claims that it's going to save money every year. That would be amazing to save a little bit of money. I also, you know, want to be open to Secretary Naylor's concerns about cybersecurity and redundancy. So these are things that I think we might want to stew on for just at least one more legislative day before we bounce things back.
Right quick to the cybersecurity, in talking with the JFO consultant, she feels comfortable that the cybersecurity plan that judiciary has proposed is a good one.
Maybe it would be worth having that that conversation on the record if we could get
Sure.
at
She's
least
happy to come back. Yeah, she is happy to come back.
Representative Waters Evans. Sorry, my mind just went there.
I'm new here, so you'll forget my name, it's fine. I have a couple questions and I'm not sure if you can answer them, maybe Representative Chase can. So the first one is, I believe the secretary said yesterday that they're already starting, like, remember he used the analogy of the bridges, they're building a temporary bridge or something. That money is coming from their current budget and they're doing it regardless of what happens to BAA, correct? I guess my question is getting down to, are they double spending money or are we, like, I don't know how that works.
Yeah, so I think that what Secretary Naylor was saying is that they were asked to essentially switch how the traffic was being handled without building a temporary system to go from one permanent thing to another thing. That's what he said.
I thought he said that they were in the works of constructing one now or getting ready to start doing the temporary one, and that would slow things down. So my other question was, how do you know how effective that would be, or do we?
I think the larger thing that we were presented with
Yeah.
yesterday, which is causing me to be ambivalent.
Yeah.
And that's rare for me. You're going to find is that we're hearing from two IT professionals who care deeply about the work that they're doing, and there are future consequences of going down different paths that, you know, we're here as citizen legislators being presented with two stories. And it's not like neither of them is invalid. They're both very valid stories.
Yeah.
And we're being asked to weigh in and say, yeah, we think that the money should go to this direction rather than that direction. It is not the same money. It is essentially the same money. It's not as if the overarching work that ADS is doing for connectivity and network and licensing, that will all continue. But my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Representative Chase, is that we're essentially choosing to have the judiciary have their own path here.
Are you talking about the firewalls specifically or the network as a whole?
I think it was the network as a whole that I was asking about.
I think this afternoon, we're going to hear about a plan for the network as a whole.
Okay.
Based on reading the legal answer from what the secretary said yesterday.
Okay.
The cost of the judiciary network, if they do it on their own, would reduce the cost of the statewide network, because that would be work that the ADS wouldn't have to do.
Okay, I think that's the question I was asking. Yeah.
Great. Representative Chase is going to
Thank
be better than me in detail. So Representative Morgan, Representative Nugent.
Yeah, so concur, it's certainly worth pondering for the weekend or for one legislative day, as you put it. But I know I've heard repeatedly from Grand Isle County folks, from both the state's attorney and the side judges there, that they are fans of trying to get these things moving as quickly as possible for timely justice, as you alluded to, Mr. Chair. I mean, but I could certainly see an argument. I heard the secretary and the IT folks from the court talking yesterday about, you know, kind of whose jurisdiction doesn't lie. So it probably could go either way, because in that world, I know that stuff doesn't happen overnight anyway. So, but anything we can do, I think, to within reason to get that timely justice. I hear about it all the time from those folks, and I'm sure many of you do from your courthouses as well. I know it's a real sensitive subject there, because a lot of times in Grand Isle County, it gets pushed over into Franklin County, sometimes into Chittenden County, like, nope, we want to do our justice here, which I concur with because it's their county courthouse. Anyway, my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Morgan. Representative Nugent, I had you next on my list.
Yeah, I feel like I could use some clarity around what that as well, because I thought I heard that and that. So is the work happening now? Is it about to be happening? And then I wonder if there's some question about connecting the two systems. Like, will the judiciary system connect to the, way out of my wheelhouse, as you can probably tell, but to like the regular state system? So I don't know.
Yeah, do you want to talk about that? I have asked Andrea, just so you all know, if Lisa might be able to come and talk with us a little bit about this now. She's the IT consultant with Joint Fiscal, so she's a nonpartisan, non-biased person in this discussion who could take a look at the testimony and has looked at the testimony we heard.
Could you restate your question?
So I thought I heard something similar to what Representative Waters Evans said about that they are in the midst of building a bridge or temporary path for the new technology for judiciary. But that seems, or is that?
Not currently. They're working on a firewall upgrade for the state systems, which is part of regular business practice. It's not specifically for judiciary, it's for the state network as a whole. That specific upgrade would not resolve the concerns that judiciary identified. And I think I heard another part of the question about the connectivity between like if judiciary does their own network, would that be connected to this executive branch network? And it would be, but it would be firewalled. Which means that the two networks would be able to communicate, but they would be secure and one wouldn't pose an additional vulnerability to the other.
Okay.
One of the things that came up, I think, in side conversations that I'd love to put on the table too was a question about the sort of what's more resilient and would keep courthouse operations open between the two proposals. Do you have any, my recollection is that if judiciary is able to build out their own system, that they essentially would be more resilient is a claim that we.
Yeah, and the secretary pointed it out yesterday that there's always a balancing act between security and accessibility. Having it as part of the ADS system would be secure but less accessible. And what the judiciary is proposing is a much more resilient system. So if one courthouse goes down, it doesn't affect the other. Each courthouse would have, at the end of their plan, 3 separate paths to communicate with other courthouses. Each would be able to stand on its own as needed. So from a resiliency and access to justice, the judiciary's plan would be the more resilient and accessible one.
Great. So that ask and you shall receive from JFO. They've been really great with me not having planned anything more than us having a big free-ranging discussion about all of our BAA items. Really appreciate Joint Fiscal for that. So let's give, while we've got a minute for Lisa to get here. Really appreciate her coming on short notice. Can I check off the true up conversation around pensions as something that we're just going to say is sort of standard practice?
Yes.
Yeah. Even though there's big dollars floating around there, in the context, it's just the normal course of business in your true up. I will say the last thing that's on my list for us to discuss today, I would love to not get into until we've maybe had a chance for Lisa to come in, but I'll just flag that if you're thinking about the $3 million proposal for the rural technical assistance grants is going to be the last thing after we talk about this judiciary conversation. Do you want a moment to catch your breath?
I like surprises.
Lisa, would you mind joining us? So we're having a committee discussion. It's somewhat less formal than much of the testimony we've had to date. So
Okay.
it's a practice having a committee discussion that's a little bit more free ranging. So we've been talking about the various items that we were asked to weigh in on from the House Appropriations Committee related to the Budget Adjustment Act. And as we looked at the Agency of Digital Services testimony and the testimony we heard from the judiciary folks yesterday, a couple of things have been on the table. I framed it as being ambivalent myself, and I think that many folks on the committee are looking at testimony from ADS that says, well, we have some concerns, cybersecurity, redundancy, we've got some stuff in the works, we're doing a firewall upgrade. And then we're hearing from judiciary saying, we've got a plan, it's better for us, let us go on our own. And so we wanted to get your evaluation, because Representative Chase had said you'd had a chance to sort of take a look at the proposal that judiciary sent. I thought it would be useful to have your
Yes,
thoughts on that.
I'm still considered working on that in process, and we're meeting on Tuesday to discuss, to really collaborate on some findings.
Could you just introduce yourself and your role for the record? Sorry, I should.
Sure, I'm sorry. My name is Lisa Govin, and I'm the IT consultant with JFO. So it is still in the works. In terms of security, I've been getting some conflicting information from both parties.
Same boat as us, good.
Yeah.
So how I'm approaching this is really, when I look at the role of judiciary and being in a separate branch of government, and the fact that, whenever I talk about security, I have to be I'm going to be vague because it's not something that's really meant for a public forum, just for reasons. You don't want to reveal too much. In other committees, when we talk more in detail about security, they've gone into executive session about that. So judiciary right now is not in control of their network. So to me, that's an issue, because if you're accountable, you need to probably be in control. You need to be in control. So I'm looking at more from the basics, like stepping back, and then looking at the actual experience of what judiciary has been experienced in the network delays and the impact that it's had on them. So that's how I'm approaching the assessment on, I don't know precisely why. I know that I've heard that it could be the actual system that judiciary is using, but then I've heard from judiciary, no, it's not. And this is what we've done to prove that to ourselves, and how we've been working with our vendor for that. So for me, I'm stepping back, looking at the history of judiciary. They have a new CIO as of last October. There had been a contractor fulfilling that role before that. And so when you have someone new coming in and assessing, the layout, they're going to view it differently probably than the predecessor, and the history of how they got in this situation in the first place. Like, why are they on this network now? It could be really a lot of history to that. So I'm not saying that ADS cannot administer a network at all. I mean, there are experts. They've done great things since they came to be. But from my perspective, just looking at, if I was in that situation, if I was accountable for security, I would need to know everything about the security and be in control of the security of it. Not, right now they don't have control. And there's a lot of details about the network that they don't know the answer to, if that is helpful.
Okay. That's helpful framing. I think the idea that they're responsible for the security and the operations of their IT infrastructure, but they don't have control over it. Yes.
Exactly. And so I did take a step back from even what was outlined as the rationale in the memo, where they requested the funds, but I think it's appropriate to do that in this case. And just from that standard alone, I think it's definitely understandable why they would want to do that. And they have there's been a security audit from a national organization for courts that was done, but they don't have the results yet. And it's my understanding that this organization was questioning that very thing. So it's possible that when we see another third party opinion about that will be there. I would expect it to be there.
But that information won't be available to us.
It's not available to them right now.
Yeah, soon enough to inform our BAA conversation though.
Yes, but again, taking a step back, for me, that's probably how I would have approached this. I would have said, we need to have control if we're accountable.
That's really helpful. And I want to open things up for questions from the committee, Lisa. And I just want to say, I really, really appreciate you coming in on short notice. And wasn't what you were planning on doing right now.
No, and I'm a little uncomfortable because we haven't spoken with Representative Squirrel and Representative Harrison on this either. And so I'm not saying this is the only finding, but it's the big one that I have right now.
So I had suggested to the committee that we try to lay things on the table on this particular item, but that I would put it in the parking lot over the weekend. And that Tuesday afternoon, we would take a few minutes to get a thumbs up or a thumbs down on where we might land on the memo that we send over BA. And it could be that we say, we see valid arguments and we don't have enough information and maybe this isn't a BAA discussion. That could be what's in the memo at the end of the day. So Representative Higley and Representative Chase.
I think it sounds like from what you said, we aren't going to know by next Tuesday what your evaluation proves to be. So I think we would have to say that in the memo.
I think the difference might be that, is there a way to split some costs out for the BAA versus the regular budget? So, what, if there's a lot of demand on the BAA for money, is there a way to split those out? Because honestly, even if you were to move forward or gave them the okay today, it's very unlikely that they would be able to start spending the bulk of that money before the next fiscal year, just because it takes some time.
I mean, that alone is going to make our colleagues across the hall say this is a fiscal 24, even if they park the money.
Yeah.
They're not going to approve this in BAA if that's really the case.
Yeah, exactly. And
That might be the deciding factor for the memo.
And then there are other caveats I would put on this. For instance, in other projects that were approved last year, we asked, because it's at such an early stage of planning that there's not a lot of the business requirements, business case formally put out there. That one, we would recommend that this project undergo an independent review to the same standards that the state is required to do an independent review for projects over $1 million. And that gets into cost benefit, it gets into risk, it's a really detailed review, much more detailed than I would have the capacity to do as a part-time consultant here. And so, but I always draw on those, and there's a lot of good information. I have never seen an independent review that didn't improve a project in state government. So it's really important. I spoke to Marcia Shells about this, and she said they would be more than happy to do that. But I think that if I would, part of my recommendation would be to include that as a caveat. But again, all I do is make recommendations. So, but that's what I would do. So at a later date, and how it works for some of the other projects is once the independent review has been done by the state, like we're doing this for the unemployment insurance system that was given an approval last year in the budget with a caveat that they go back to JTAC. After the independent review, and I get a chance to do the more detailed review of the project. It's all based on the standard criteria for all projects, and present that to JTAC, that they would make the decision whether to release the funds. So, I would also recommend, because again, this is at an early stage, a lot isn't known. They haven't contracted with anybody for services, so there's a lot of unknowns. So,
okay. That's very, very helpful, Representative Chase.
That's what I was going to say. I just wanted to add, I'm not sure if we've mentioned JITOC on the record yet. JITOC is Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee. And it's 3 House and 3 Senate members. They review a lot of these projects year round.
And Representative Chase, you serve on JITOC.
That was my question.
Yeah,
I have for the past 2 sessions. I'm not sure how this session will go.
Oh, we're still waiting on the speaker's appointments for the biennium we're currently in.
I don't think the Senate has made their appointments up there.
Okay, so we're flying the plane before the pilots have been decided. That's very legislative of us.
Needs a current.
Representative Murphy.
I hear it, and your points are well taken, and I also hear the urgency that things are bad and getting worse. I just know from my perspective, one of the things I do outside of it is guardian ad litem in the child protection system, and we see things dragging on. The docket just keeps backing up, and Like when we heard the other day about the judge having to shut down the court for the day because the system just wasn't working. I think that's really unacceptable. And it adds some urgency to a situation that was weak to start with. So I hope that becomes a factor as much as other things that we're doing. Don't want to act in haste, but it's an urgent situation.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to add that I think there is room for consideration based on any new information that comes out in the budget, requested budget addressed today, that there might be an opportunity to revisit to see if there might be additional areas where there could be some piggybacking between the executive branch and judiciary in a way that was acceptable and did give judiciary control over their network. So I think there's still a chance for that. We'll just have to see what comes out today.
So I think we've learned some new things. I want to, I think I have a better idea now of the committee's sense on this issue, and we'll try to capture that in a draft and then circulate that for Tuesday. And if any additional information comes out of that, conversations on Tuesday that would help us with BAA, or when we see the budget proposal, if there's something that is very clear, but I think we're going to have to truly get at this. It sounds like there's some more work that needs to be done, and that's going to be the crux of the conversation. I've circled all the way back to where I was at the beginning, which is that these smaller items around soundproofing and things that are just obvious, that seem like no-brainers and would improve the experience. I'm inclined to say, from a policy perspective, this committee supports those in the memo, and then this larger ask around the IT system itself. Is there anything else you wanted to add around some of the smaller pieces?
I just want to be clear that I have in no way determined what exactly caused the slowdown, and I'm not, I'm just trying to base it on what we know, and what we know is there has been issues. We know judiciary said they did due diligence, followed up with their vendor, and confirmed that it wasn't from their system. And so all we know is, fact, we have a slowdown that's unacceptable, that's causing problems with business continuity for the courts. And, there has been nothing that I've found in what they're proposing that is off. Oh, wait, one thing, not off. But I do have an outstanding question to them around how, if they're prepared to pay for the cybersecurity insurance. And I didn't get a real answer on that yet. So what I'm trying to do when I approach this is really identify kind of the broad areas that would indicate whether or not it was a well thought out proposal or not. And I've seen nothing that tells me that it isn't. So.
So I'm gonna keep this one open, but I'll work on some language. It seems like we're heading in a direction, but we'll leave it open until Tuesday and try to wrap up this discussion in a few minutes when we can squeeze it in on Tuesday. And BAA, like I had said yesterday, we're asked to do a lot with limited information whenever we're making recommendations for BAA, and we don't always have to make those recommendations as a policy committee. But it's our chance to give our sense of where things are going to our colleagues over in appropriations. And Lisa, I really, really deeply appreciate you coming in. And since we've got a few minutes before we head over to anything, do you want to maybe talk about sort of your background and like what your role is going to be, and how JFO sees your role helping us as legislators do our work more generally?
Okay, sure. I've been in IT my whole career. I started in state government over at the Department of Education when they were implementing the first education finance reform with a statewide property tax. They brought me in. I had done contract with them before. They wanted somebody to build the systems that could ensure they could review budgets and in time to actually set tax rates. So that's where I started. After many years and many twists and turns, I was the IT director there for 7 years. And we implemented the first statewide student data warehouse, which was in place. It was collaborative with the school districts. And then after 7 years, I went out to the private sector. I worked for a software company, and my role there was, they called it enterprise solutions expert. And really what that meant was when it was a line of business software company, so think for state governments, so permitting, grants, licensing, those types of things. And my role was to go out and make sure that the design was such so it could be implemented across multiple agencies for state government. So I have a lot of state government experience with other state governments, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Colorado. I also did a very large project for the federal home loan banks, so I did this for 6 of them. Regionally, they want to collaborate on projects. So I have a lot of vendor experience, enough that I never wanted to work for a vendor again. Meaning I really feel government's important, and I guess just personally profit wasn't so much important to me. I wanted to make sure that to really work on the side of government to make sure that they were getting the best bang for their buck, because I do feel so strongly about that. And so I formed my own company, and I did some work in the private sector, but my big project was back at the Department of Education, just looking after the state's interest for the student information. It wasn't a statewide student information system. It was a way to automate the data transfer for student level data from the schools to the Department of Education. And that project's in place and it's working. So that's my background. And I've been here, I started last September. I took over for Dan Smith, who was the previous consultant. So when Dan left, he transferred his portfolio to me. And the portfolio is the projects, because obviously I'm one person part-time, you can't focus on all the projects. So it was some of the larger or just more, concerning projects that the legislature wanted somebody to look out for. And one of them is the independent eligibility and enrollment. I got the acronym correct. The IE&E project. Integrated. Thank you. How can I be in IT if I don't know acronyms? I don't know. But anyway, a project over at Human Services that's been around for a while. And then I was closing down a judiciary project for their case management system, and that was pretty much done when I showed up. And then last year there was a lot of new projects funded via the budget. One of the DMV projects, which was enormous. And I was able to do a full review on that. Now, when I do a review, it's based on a methodology developed by my predecessor. It just really looks at 7 major areas of IT. And that way every project can be looked at in the same way and to the same standards. And really what you're trying to do is identify, are all the pieces here that would allow a project to be successful in place? And so I did the review of the DMV because it was at a stage where all the business requirements had been done. They had developed the contract language. And so it was at that stage where a review should be done. There were other projects that were requested in the budget that it wasn't at a phase where there was enough information available to actually do a full review. So I did a cursory review. And then for those projects, we actually had a check-in with Jai Talk at the point where when there was enough information, the state's required independent review for projects over $1 million had been done, so that could inform how I looked at the project. And so the projects that are outstanding for that type of review are the unemployment insurance project and the ERP, the finance module, enterprise relationship planning document. So covered under that umbrella, there are solutions that handle HR, budgeting, finance. I think it might do grants, but not, the state doesn't think it could do that particular portion for them. Anyway, so that will be done as soon as they reach a point where they've selected a vendor for implementation, have done the contracting, independent reviews done, and then I can look at it. So really, I can help with meetings like this, talking about these issues that do come up, and I'm asked to do research. of course, the reviews and also ongoing monitoring of projects. So for the IE and E project, I meet with them monthly and keep you all advised on what's happening in those projects. So I have currently a draft review of the current projects in my portfolio. I submitted it to JFO. They have a really rigorous way of looking at those before they're released. So it's sort of in that phase.
Well, when that is ready, would love to have you in to give us kind of an overview of where things are with major IT projects. I was on the House Transportation Committee for 2 terms, and I gotta tell you, I am so excited, probably more excited than anybody outside of the DMV itself about the fact that we're finally doing that project. And I really hope to hear from you that
It is going great and it's on time, and I don't think I'll ever see such a beautiful project in my career. It's really that good.
I mean,
And I'm kind of picky, so I love saying that.
The back end on some of the modules, I mean, we're going back to the 1970s on some of that stuff.
That explains it.
How did we get into the?
And I gotta tell you, our DMV, compared to other states, just does fabulous work. And we have great people there, but man, their IT systems were like just layered on.
Oh, yeah.
Old stuff, and got their money's worth in that old system.
To find a vendor that has done this successfully in 17 other states is on time and on budget is just unheard of. So, and to have Commissioner Manoli really pushing this through, because it really is going to change how they operate. And she's doing a great job. And that's not easy to do for an agency where people have been there for a very long time and it's hard to change, but.
Well, thank you very much. We are going to switch gears and talk about the last big thing, which I imagine we will have a few thoughts on. And we will definitely have you back for more IT work, Lisa.
You just call.
Thank you. I will try to plan a little bit better next time. Okay. So the last piece I wanted to talk about in our morning session here. So the $3 million proposal for rural technical assistance grants. We've heard some testimony from Deputy Secretary Farnham about this. I know a lot of us have heard from a number of towns. I've also spoken with a number of our colleagues, especially folks over on appropriations. And it seems to me that there's a lot of consensus that yes, we want to help towns get what they need in order to apply, and that there is a disadvantage. There are underserved, as we say, communities. We also, I don't think that there's total buy-in on the methodology of using the index. I think it's a useful tool to try to create an index, but is that the best way to figure out the eligibility? I think that remains an open question. The other thing that I wrestle with is if there aren't towns that have already selected a vendor other than their regional planning commission, is this an appropriate thing for us to say, yes, this is exactly what we should do in the BAA? And so my inclination is to say to our colleagues over in appropriations, yes, we want this money available for technical assistance grants. We think there might be a little bit more work to do on exactly the eligibility and how it gets rolled out, or if it needs to be totally specified the way that it was presented to us. And I want to open that up for committee discussion because I know there are lots of strong feelings about that. Representative Hango.
Thank you. I don't know that this will help anybody, but there is a bill, a standalone bill that's being developed. It actually went out for signatures today. That's called the Rural Administrative Capacity Bill. And Representative Sims has a copy of it. The index in that bill has been changed. So it's not the index that's provided in the language for the BAA, but it will be an index that's developed with the assistance of the VLCT. So with their input, the index can hopefully be tweaked. And my understanding is that the Agency of Administration is open to suggestions on how to tweak the index, because there are some questions about the eligibility of communities in that, on that index, when you look at the end result of who comes out on top and who comes out on the bottom. The other thing too is the regional planning commissions. I know, Mr. Chair, you just said something about that. And I am not sure that there's a perfect understanding about how the RPCs fit into this equation, especially across the hall in our appropriations committee. So my understanding is that a pot of money will be held by the Agency of Administration as it's written in the BAA. And that pot of money can be accessed by regional planning commissions, regional development corporations, and other entities, which the BAA would, the Agency of Administration would have a list of vetted contractors. So any entity could work with a town or a group in your town to request part of this $3 million funding from the Agency of Administration, the RPCs being one of them. Does that clarify at all what you were getting at?
Yeah, so what I was getting at is that we recognize the need for technical assistance. And I think there's broad support for the money. I think that given that there won't be a huge gap between the BAA and potential budget on this, and that the money's not huge, that it's worth parking the money, perhaps in the context of that bill, even work on those eligibility requirements, and then, you know, allow us to kind of do our work with the administration and kind of fine tune what they're talking about. I think I'd like to express support for the money, and that's about where I think our business with it ends. And then it's in appropriations hands to say whether it's appropriate for BAA versus the budget. And I think one of the things that the idea that the index might need some tweaking, that there are some, you know, probably minor disagreements, but I think valid ones about if you have a limited pool of money and it's for communities that are underserved, who's in and who's out and who gets to decide that eligibility, I think is worth taking just a few short weeks to decide on. And so I think there's I think we're like 80% of the way there, and protecting the money is probably the most important thing, as opposed to saying, yeah, we can get it released right now. And I don't know how you feel about that, Representative Hango. I know you have strong support for the concept.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm sure whatever we recommend as a committee will be a majority vote, and I'm still gonna hope that it stays in the BAA, but that's fine too. I really appreciate the support that you're willing to offer for the money, because the funding really is needed, and how we get there is just a matter of time. And I think the expediency of the BAA was the reason for it being there. I can't speak for the administration on that, but I'm sure that was their intent, to put it in the BAA. And yes, we do have a standalone bill, so that hopefully would get taken up in committee. And Commerce is also House Commerce is also going to weigh in on this portion of the BAA. So we're kind of waiting to hear how it comes out with them as well. So, thank you.
Representative Higley.
I think if I can, am I correct? The money that we're talking about that's going to be available has to be expended by 2026? The ARPA money?
The ARPA money.
If it's ARPA, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, there is a little bit of a urgency here. I did talk with somebody in Commerce, and I think I mentioned it yesterday too, that if there is a provision for these RPCs to help out towns, it's important that they do personally get in contact with each town so that the towns are aware. Because again, I know that some of my towns aren't involved with our NVDA. For whatever reason, they have steered the barrels in for a long time. So it's important to get them in the loop if they know that there's help out there for expending this money.
Representative Handel.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Higley. That definitely will be a required piece of this, that's going to be the responsibility of many folks, the VLCT, the RPCs, the RDCs, to actually go to town select boards and tell them that this exists. Because in many cases, particularly a couple of my towns, I'm sure a couple of yours, folks just really aren't aware of what is out there for them, and they sometimes feel that it's beyond their reach because they have no technical assistance to be able to do that. They just don't have the human capacity. The original title of this bill was rural capacity, and it was suggested to us, why don't you add a human component to that? Because that's really what you're talking about. You're talking about people on the ground that need help. And it is, so it's now the rural administrative capacity.
Well, I wonder if a longer term discussion for us might be, and I brought this up a little bit about, are there barriers beyond technical assistance for our smaller communities to connect with the resources that they need? And, you know, I think about the entire regime of the matching formulas for different grants.
Yes.
Being another one. You know, there are some towns that are like, I don't even want to go down that road or spend time on it because even if it's only 10%, we haven't got a dime for it, right?
Yep.
So those are, I think there's a bigger context here beyond this that we.
Well, and that's why we got to have a longer discussion about it than it'd be okay.
Yeah. But I also think there are, I'm sympathetic to the time constraints around the ARPA dollars too. So I will, unless there's an objection, I will put a line about, you know, support for the proposal, the acknowledgement that there are ongoing concerns in a bill coming about the eligibility tool, the index, and that we'll leave it to appropriations to decide whether we can expedite this in the BAA or at least the very least park the money so that that's available. Is there any objection to that being the frame for the draft? Okay, that went faster than I thought. I'm still getting used to you all and sort of how what kind of questions are going to come up, and I really appreciate everybody's patience with me as a new chair as I try to get a flavor for what are the things that we're going to want to talk about more, and what are things we're kind of like, yeah, we're all on board, let's do it. So next
feeling is
table setting for the next couple of weeks before we break. We're going to get next week time to hear a download on the sports betting report that was done. Representative Byron was involved in that. So we'll be teeing up a conversation about that piece of policy that's going to be coming our way in a bill.
I just got the draft, the final revision. So if anybody's interested in sharing that, I have a copy.
So for the, dozen or so legislators that have said, have this discussion or I hate this, we are going to be talking about it. Just wanted to put that out there. That'll be coming Wednesday morning. I think
Correct.
We're booked on that.
Yep.
Other big thing next week is that we're gonna have some introductions. The Attorney General is going to come in. There's a report coming out around domestic violence that she's going to be highlighting for us, and then may have a policy proposal that either starts here or starts in the Senate. So I want to hear what our new Attorney General has to say about that. And then I'd like to start doing a little bit of a deeper dive into some elections policy as well in the next week and a half. So we'll be having, Will sending the director of the elections division back in and some other folks to talk and frame up a little bit about some of the things that we do in Vermont that are a little bit unique, different, might cause some of our constituents some concerns. And then some housekeeping stuff that's going to come over from the Secretary of State's office in a bill that I know that they're working on, that I've given the blessing for them to work with Legislative Council. And we're going to see a package of proposals, might be the end of next week, probably more the following week. But those are kind of buckets of things that are coming our way. I also want to make some time for some of the bills that have been referred to us this week. We've gotten a few more of those. And if there are things that folks on the committee would like to make sure that we expedite or get in that aren't on my radar, just wanted everybody thinking about agenda setting for the next couple of weeks, because crossover going to be here before we even know it. Wow. Representative Rowicki.
Do we have any charter changes lining up yet?
You know, we got one on there. We got the Colchester Fire District dissolution is kind of in that wheelhouse.
That's where we have the real fun.
Yeah, so
I'm actually really excited for this. In like the nerdiest of ways.
Yeah.
right. I love the municipal stuff. It's near and dear to me. But what I'll say is charter changes not being subject to crossover
Gives us a lot of time.
Yeah, it gives us some time, especially for the ones that aren't super controversial, right? Because we can kind of fit them in whenever we feel like, as opposed to being under the gun of the legislative calendar. Yes, Representative Hooper.
So a charter change that we had entertained in a different biennium that is being brought back up is still considered a charter change or a new bill?
So this biennium, the slate has been wiped clean. Those bills don't exist. So if there's a charter change that was voted by your community previously that's still sort of eligible, it would still need a bill introduced in order to be considered. So if you are talking with your Burlington municipal officials and one of those many charters that has been in this committee's purview in the past wants another shot at a discussion, you should put in a drafting request before January 31st is the request deadline. And then the approval deadline on an individual bill isn't until the 21st. But again, the charters aren't subject to the deadline. But I would say getting a bill drafted, even if it's identical language and up on the wall, is a good way to remind all of us that that's something want to bring back this year.
So kind of the requesting is, once it's brought forward as a charter change, does it ever lose that status?
You should ask Tucker this, but my understanding is once the committee's voted to approve it
or not approve it,
right? Then that's the community has made their wishes known. Then regardless of which biennium it comes in the future, we can take that up and take action on it. It's up to us whether we want to approve that charter change. It's the community weighing in is typically what kicks off the process with their public vote, but we could take it up a few years down the road and it's still a live issue. It's our rules govern as opposed to the municipality. And in fact, we don't always have to do exactly what the municipality asks us for. I mean, we try to respect what the voters voted on, but we often will make edges, given that we're a Dillon's rule state, we'll make changes around the edges of the policy or tweaks to the language to make them conform. Or sometimes we just say, you know what, we're not going to take action on that and it stays parked. So that is the charge of this committee, is to evaluate those charter change proposals. And I'll try to be fair and make sure that each of them has its day. But yeah, I think that the page 46 is the only one that I know that we have.
We have no bills coming to us today.
Today we did have a few this week that are new ones that we haven't heard an introduction on. We'll make some time for them. Any questions, comments before we close out for the day? I encourage folks to take a look at bills. There were a lot of documents that we were referred to this week. So if you have a little extra time this afternoon, want to, for instance, check out the Agency of Digital Services website, I highly recommend that. The liquor and lottery pieces, because we're going to be talking about some of those specific policies over the next couple of weeks. Any of that information, if you want to review around our jurisdiction there, I think is worth doing some homework on. So give a little time this afternoon and.
Oh, Matt, did you say that there's a report that you could send us?
There is a report, actually, I was just, do you mind sending the report?
That'd be great.
Yes, and so
It was mid-December, it was released.
December 15th, we put that in, yes. So it's very new information. And I just have the receive a final draft with one little tweak on some licensing fees. So I have the final draft that I'm going to start collecting signatures off of. So if you want to see that too, I can send that to you.
Yeah, so that's really, really good. So I would say we'll get the link out, we'll post it as well on the committee website, just so there's a reference to it. But the idea is, if you want to skim it, we're going to get, Tucker's going to walk us through what it says, and then we'll be hearing some from JFO and from other folks about how it was created, to sort of tee up a conversation about the potential legislation. So next week's just the introduction. We're not going to make any decisions on this next week. Just want to make that very clear for the public.
No, this is a very long, starting a very long
beginning of a process.
And situational awareness for newer members primarily. There will be representatives from the gaming industry, special interest groups floating around the hallways next week. So they might want 5 minutes of your time.
Yeah. And you know what? That actually brings up something that I think is really important for all of us, which is that I think in our general parlance out in the world, lobbyists have a kind of a bad reputation. I think if you ask them, the average American, do they like lobbyists? They'll probably tell you they're not the most popular people. Lobbyists have information.
Yep.
And so people who are advocates for a particular position, it's important to know what their position is and kind of understand where they're coming from, and that your responsibility is to your conscience and your constituents, right? But the advocates do have information, and I would really encourage all of us, as people come up to us and say, hey, I represent so-and-so on such and such a bill, and here's what I know. Ask them really the questions that you have, because even though you kind of know it's coming from a particular position, that information can help inform our work here. And I would really encourage you to have those conversations. Just, know that people are coming with their own position in the business or the organization that they're advocating for. So, yeah. And if you have questions and want to help navigate any difficult conversations, that's what some of us who've been here a couple biennia will try to help you with. All right. I think that's it. So thanks for joining House Government Operations Military Affairs. We'll sign off for the week.